I had been at sea long enough to know when a ship was lying to its crew. Wood groans tell the truth. Nails speak in their own language. And when seawater begins to find its way into places it does not belong, no amount of optimism can silence it. By the time we reached the lonely islands far off the South American coast, I had already made up my mind, even if I refused to admit it out loud. The ship had suffered too much. Storms had twisted her frame. Long weeks of salt and strain had loosened seams that should never have breathed. I was the sailing master. My duty was not comfort, but judgment, and my judgment told me this vessel would not survive another long passage. The men were tired. Tempers were short. The captain, proud and impatient, wanted to press on. Repairs meant delay. Delay meant lost opportunity. War did not wait for careful men. When we anchored near the island to take on fresh water, I walked the shoreline and studied the land. It was quiet, green, untouched. Goats moved along the slopes, descendants of animals left behind by earlier sailors. Birds nested freely. Fresh water ran down from the hills. It was not friendly, but it was alive. That night I spoke my concerns openly. I told the captain the ship was unsafe. I said we should stay and repair her properly before tempting fate again. He heard my words as defiance. I heard his reply as stubborn pride. The argument ended with a sentence I had not intended to say out loud. I would rather stay here than sail on a coffin. The words hung in the air longer than I expected. I assumed they would force caution. Instead, they were taken as a challenge. The next morning the decision was made quickly and without mercy. They put me ashore with what could be spared: a musket, some powder, a knife, a hatchet, a cooking pot, a Bible, clothes, bedding, not enough to live comfortably, but enough to survive if survival was possible at all. As the boat pulled away, something in me shifted. Confidence drained faster than the tide. I shouted. I waved. I begged them to take me back, admitting what I had been too proud to confess the night before. That I had been wrong to speak so boldly, that I had not meant it this way, that I was afraid. The ship did not turn. I stood on the shore and watched her grow smaller against the water. Each second widened the distance between choice and consequence. By the time her sails became indistinct against the horizon, I understood the weight of what I had done. I was alone. At first, I convinced myself it was temporary. Ships passed these waters. Someone would see the smoke of a fire. Someone would notice movement. Rescue was a matter of days, perhaps weeks. I stayed near the beach. I slept poorly. At night, the cries of sea lions echoed across the sand, their voices loud and unfamiliar. They gathered in great numbers, filling the darkness with noise and motion, as if mocking the silence that waited inland. Food was simple but scarce. I ate shellfish pulled from the rocks and rationed what little I had been given. I watched the horizon endlessly, scanning for sails that never appeared. Regret is a quiet thing at first. It does not shout. It whispers. It asks the same question again and again. Why did you speak? Why didn't you hold your tongue? Why did you believe you were right? Each sunset brought a deeper understanding. The ship was not coming back. My protest had sealed my fate, not saved me from it. I had believed myself experienced, hardened by years at sea. But standing alone on that shore, I realized how much of my strength had always come from others. The shared labor, the shouted orders, the simple comfort of human presence. Now there was only wind, water, and time. And time, I would soon learn, is the most dangerous element of all. The first days passed slowly, yet somehow disappeared before I could measure them. I woke with the sun and slept when darkness finally claimed the sky. I stayed close to the shore, convinced that leaving it would mean missing my only chance at rescue. Each morning I climbed the rocks and searched the horizon, tracing the empty line where sea met sky. Each evening I told myself that tomorrow would be different. It never was. Hunger arrived quietly. At first, it was only a dull ache easily ignored while hope still had weight. I gathered shellfish and pulled lobsters from shallow water with clumsy hands, burning my fingers and cutting my skin on sharp stone. I ate what I could, sometimes raw, sometimes half-cooked. more concerned with filling my stomach than with taste. Nights were worse. The sounds came first. Deep, barking calls echoed across the beach as sea lions gathered in great numbers. They moved without fear, bold and loud, their bodies heavy against the sand. I had lived among cannon fire and storms, yet these unfamiliar noises unsettled me more than I cared to admit. In the dark, the imagination fills the spaces that reason cannot. Sleep became fractured. I woke often, heart racing, listening for threats that did not exist, or worse, ones I could not see. Loneliness did not strike all at once. It arrived in layers. At first I missed conversation, then I missed being heard. Soon after, I missed the sound of my own name spoken aloud. I found myself talking, not to anyone in particular, but to the air, to the waves, to objects that did not answer back. The voice sounded strange in my ears, thinner than I remembered. I began counting things: steps along the shoreline, birds in flight, days marked by crude lines scratched into wood. Counting gave shape to time, and time needed shape, or it threatened to stretch into something endless and unbearable. Fear crept in when I considered injury: a twisted ankle, a deep cut, a fever. Any small misfortune here would grow teeth. There was no one to help me, no margin for error. I moved carefully, slowly, aware that caution was now survival. Food was unpredictable. Some days the sea offered more than I could eat. Other days it gave nothing at all. The land beyond the beach tempted me with shade and greenery, but I resisted it. The shore felt like connection. The interior felt like surrender. It was during those early days that the full weight of regret settled into my chest. I replayed the argument endlessly. The tone of my voice, the look on the captain's face, the moment I believed my experience granted me authority over fate itself. Pride is an odd companion. It feels like strength until the instant it abandons you. I began reading the Bible aloud, not from devotion alone, but because it anchored my thoughts. Words spoken with purpose filled the silence better than my own scattered reflections. Familiar passages steadied my breathing and slowed the racing of my mind. Still, hope weakened with every empty horizon. Weeks passed. I could no longer pretend this was a delay. It was a condition, a new reality that demanded adjustment or surrender. The island would not bend to my expectations. If I was to survive, I would have to bend instead. The turning point came one night when the sea lions drove me from my resting place entirely. Their numbers had grown, their noise relentless. I found myself retreating inland, step by cautious step, until the shoreline sounds faded behind me. For the first time, I slept without being shaken awake by the beach. When morning came, I realized something important. The island was not divided into danger and safety the way I had imagined. The shore offered hope, but it also offered fear. The land beyond offered uncertainty, but also possibility. Standing there, looking back toward the water, I understood that waiting alone would kill me long before hunger did. Survival would require more than patience. It would require change. Moving inland felt like crossing an invisible boundary. The beach had been my anchor to the world I lost. Every step away from it felt like admitting that no ship was coming. Not today, not soon, but the first night I spent beyond the shoreline was the first night I spent beyond the shoreline was the first night I truly rested. The air was calmer. The noise faded. For the first time since being left behind, my thoughts slowed enough for sleep to take hold. When I woke, I explored with new eyes. The island revealed itself gradually, as if testing whether I deserved its trust. Goats moved along the hills with ease, their bodies lean and sure-footed. Fresh water flowed from higher ground. Trees offered shade and materials. The land was not generous, but it was fair. Food became my first discipline. I learned where goats traveled and when they paused. At first, the musket made the task simple. One shot could feed me for days, but powder does not replenish itself. Each discharge was a decision with consequences measured weeks ahead. I began to stalk them instead, learning their paths, their habits, their moments of vulnerability. Failure was common, success was exhausting. When I did bring one down, I thanked the silence around me, not from ritual, but from understanding. Nothing here was wasted. Meat was dried. Heat was cleaned and saved. Bones became tools. Survival was not about taking. It was about using. Shelter followed. I built 2 huts from trees and brush, one for sleeping, one for cooking. Separation mattered. Smoke attracts insects. Food attracts animals. Order reduced risk. I placed them where wind and water could not easily undo my work. Time took on new meaning. Days were shaped by necessity rather than choice. Gather food, repair tools, strengthen shelter, rest. Without realizing it, I had begun to create a rhythm. Routine quieted the mind. It gave structure to hours that might otherwise collapse into formless waiting. Clothing became a problem sooner than expected. Salt and sun destroyed fabric quickly. When my garments finally failed, I relied on what I had learned long before the sea claimed me. I cured goatskins and stitched them together with crude tools, fashioning clothes that protected against wind and injury. They were rough, heavy, and imperfect, but they worked. My feet hardened until shoes became unnecessary. With each adaptation, fear loosened its grip, not because danger had vanished, but because I had learned how to meet it. The island was no longer an enemy. It was a system, governed by rules that could be observed and respected. Injury tested me more severely than hunger ever had. During a long chase after a goat, I slipped and fell from a steep incline. The impact drove the breath from my body. Pain spread quickly, blinding and absolute. I lay still, unsure if I could move, unsure if movement would make things worse. Hours passed, or perhaps only minutes. Time loses clarity when pain takes command. I remember staring at the sky, thinking that this was how it would end, not with drama, but with stillness. A foolish fall, a lesson learned too late. When I finally moved, the pain obeyed. I was bruised, shaken, but alive. The goat I had chased lay dead nearby, its body breaking my fall. I took no pride in that fortune, only humility. From that day forward, caution governed every step. My tools wore down. I reforged a blade from scrap metal left by earlier visitors, hammering it into usefulness with patience rather than skill. Progress was slow, but progress is measured by direction, not speed. Rats tested my resolve nightly. They gnawed at supplies, disturbed my rest, and reminded me that nothing here belonged solely to me. I found relief by living near wildcats, whose presence restored balance where brute force failed. Evenings became quieter. I read aloud. I sang, not for joy, but for steadiness. Sound reminded me that I still existed as more than muscle and instinct. Faith became less about doctrine and more about orientation, something to hold the mind in place when isolation tried to pull it apart. As weeks turned into months, something unexpected happened. I stopped thinking of myself as abandoned. I was not waiting anymore. I was living. That realization did not erase loneliness, but it changed its shape. Isolation became a condition rather than a punishment. The island was no longer a place I endured. It was a place I understood. Understanding, I learned, is its own form of shelter. There is a point in long solitude when survival is no longer the hardest task. The body adapts. Muscles learn the land. Hands move without hesitation. Hunger, cold, and fatigue become familiar adversaries, dangerous but predictable. What remains unpredictable is the mind. Time stretched in strange ways. Days passed slowly, yet months vanished without ceremony. I marked them, but the marks felt symbolic rather than precise. Seasons announced themselves through changes in wind and growth, not through numbers I trusted. I spoke to myself more often now. At first, it had been accidental thoughts escaping my mouth. Later, it became intentional. Conversation organizes thinking. Without it, the mind begins to loop, repeating fears until they gain substance. Speaking broke the loops. It gave my thoughts edges again. Silence was never truly silent. The wind moved through trees with different voices. Animals passed nearby unseen. Even the island shifted under rain and heat. Yet none of these sounds answered back. That absence pressed against me harder than any storm I had known at sea. Memory became both refuge and threat. I recalled faces, places, arguments, laughter. Some memories warmed me, others sharpened regret until it felt newly forged. I learned to choose carefully which recollections I allowed space. Too much of the past pulled me away from the present, and the present was where survival lived. Faith deepened, not as certainty, but as companionship. Reading and singing steadied me when thoughts began to drift toward despair. The words grounded my language, preserving clarity. I feared losing command of speech more than hunger. Language is order, and order is survival. The island tested me again when ships appeared. The first time, I saw sails where the sea had been empty for so long that I doubted my own sight. Hope surged instantly, powerful and reckless. I ran toward the coast, waving, shouting, exposing myself without thought. Then I recognized the flag. Spanish. Fear replaced hope with terrifying speed. Capture would not mean rescue, it would mean chains, labor, perhaps death. I fled inland, heart pounding louder than the surf behind me. I hid among trees, breath shallow, body still. They came ashore. Voices carried through the forest. Boots pressed into soil not far from where I crouched. At one point, men passed close enough that I could smell them. One stopped beneath the tree where I hid, relieving himself, unaware of how close he stood to another life. When they left, I remained frozen long after their ship departed. Relief arrived slowly, unwilling to be trusted. After that, hope became dangerous. I trained myself not to react immediately to distant sails. Survival required restraint. Emotion could no longer be allowed to overrule judgment. I learned to observe first, decide second, act last. Isolation sharpened discipline, but it also exposed fault lines. There were days when motivation thinned without warning. Tasks felt heavier, purpose blurred. On those days, routine carried me when resolve could not. Small acts, repairing a wall, cleaning a tool, kept the mind moving forward when the future felt too large to face. I measured progress differently now, not by rescue, but by stability. Had I eaten? Had I rested? Had I maintained what I built? Survival was no longer dramatic. It was quiet, methodical, almost peaceful. Yet peace was fragile. At times I feared that if rescue came, I would not recognize myself in the world beyond the island. Solitude had reshaped me. Noise, crowds, conflict. These now felt distant, abstract. I had once believed solitude was punishment. Now I understood it as exposure. Stripped of distraction, a man meets himself fully for better or worse. I had been forced to confront pride, fear, patience, and endurance without audience or excuse. When I thought of rescue, it was no longer as escape, it was as transition. The island had not broken me, but it had remade me. Whether the world would accept that version of me, or whether I would accept it myself, remained uncertain, but I continued, day by day, because continuation had become instinct. And instinct, when tempered by reason, is a powerful ally. By the time the years began to blur together, I no longer measured survival in days. Time had stopped behaving the way it once did. There were no deadlines, no voyages to complete, no orders to follow. Instead, life unfolded in cycles. Sunrise, labor, rest, darkness. The islands set the pace and I followed. I had become efficient. My movements were economical, shaped by repetition rather than urgency. I knew where food could be found in every season. I knew where paths were safest after rain, which slopes turned treacherous under dry soil. The land no longer surprised me. It informed me. What surprised me was the change within myself. I no longer woke each morning scanning the horizon with expectation. The shoreline had lost its authority over my thoughts. Rescue was possible, but it was no longer central. My survival no longer depended on hope. It depended on presence. I had accepted that this might be my entire life. That acceptance was not despair, it was clarity. When the future collapses into the present gains weight. Every task matters. Every decision counts. There is no later to defer to. Solitude became a strange companion. I missed people, not specific faces, but the idea of connection. Yet I also noticed that my mind had grown quieter. The constant noise of ambition, competition, and grievance had faded. In its place was a steady awareness of necessity. I did not feel powerful. I felt sufficient. The island demanded nothing beyond attention and effort. It rewarded consistency. When I followed its rules, it sustained me. When I ignored them, it reminded me swiftly. There were moments of joy, unexpected and brief. A successful hunt after many failed attempts. A shelter standing firm through violent weather. The simple comfort of warmth after cold. These moments were not celebrated loudly. They were acknowledged quietly, stored away like provisions. I thought often of the man I had been before, quick to argue, certain of my judgment, restless even in company. That man would not have survived here. He would have fought the island instead of learning it. He would have exhausted himself chasing control rather than cultivating balance. Isolation had stripped away performance. There was no one to impress, no one to convince, no one to blame, only outcomes. I no longer feared madness the way I once had. The routines had anchored me. Faith had steadied me. Language had remained intact. I knew myself well enough now to recognize dangerous thoughts before they gained traction. Still, the human instinct for connection never disappears. I sometimes imagined conversation, not with real voices, but with the idea of another mind listening. These imagined exchanges were calm, measured. They reflected the version of myself the island had shaped. When sails appeared on the horizon now, I watched carefully, without rushing. I assessed direction, markings, intent. I did not reveal myself until I was certain. Hope, when disciplined, is not reckless. It is patient. The island had taught me patience more thoroughly than any voyage or conflict ever had. Waiting was no longer empty time. It was active observation. It was readiness without agitation. I was no longer merely surviving. I was complete. That realization frightened me more than hunger ever had. If rescue came, I would leave behind not just a place, but a way of being that I had come to understand deeply. Yet I knew I would go, not because the island had failed me, but because the world was still part of me, whether I wished it or not. The long wait did not end with despair. It ended with quiet preparation. The morning rescue came did not announce itself as extraordinary. The sky was clear, the wind steady. I was moving through my routine when something unfamiliar interrupted the rhythm movement on the horizon that did not behave like cloud or wave. I stopped and watched without haste, letting certainty form before emotion could interfere. 2 ships, not Spanish. I waited. When the boats turned toward the island, I revealed myself carefully, stepping into view where I could be seen without desperation. When they reached shore, I stood still, uncertain how to speak to other men after so long without them. They stared at me as though I had stepped out of legend rather than forest and stone. Words failed me at first. Joy arrived too quickly, flooding thought and voice alike. I remember laughing without meaning to. I remember the strange weight of being looked at, truly looked at, after years of invisibility. They took me aboard. The deck moved beneath my feet in ways I had almost forgotten. The smells of tar, cloth, and human closeness overwhelmed me. My body reacted before my mind could catch up. I ate carefully, my stomach unused to abundance. I slept lightly, waking often, convinced I was dreaming. Conversation felt awkward, as if my thoughts had learned a slower pace than speech required. Yet the men listened with patience. They watched me with curiosity and respect, noting how easily I moved, how familiar the island had made me with survival. I helped where I could. Old skills returned quickly. Sail, rope, rhythm, these things had never left me entirely. The sea felt smaller now, less threatening than before. I had faced something far more relentless on land. As the island receded behind us, I did not feel relief so much as separation. I had lived there long enough for it to feel like a part of me. Leaving felt like shedding a layer of skin. The return to the world was louder than I remembered. Crowds, questions, expectations. People wanted the story shaped for them. Simpler, sharper, heroic. I gave them what I could, though the truth was quieter and harder to translate. Survival is not a single triumph. It is thousands of small decisions made correctly, day after day, when no one is watching. I returned to the sea, but I was not the same man who had argued his pride onto an island years earlier. Solitude had corrected me. It had taught me restraint, patience, the value of listening to land, to silence, to myself. I had learned that strength is not loud and endurance does not announce itself. When I reflect on those years now, I do not think first of fear or suffering. I think of clarity. Stripped of distraction, life revealed its essentials: food, shelter, purpose, attention. Everything else fell away. I survived because I learned when to stop fighting and start adapting. The island did not rescue me. It prepared me. And when I returned to the world of men, I carried that preparation with me. Quietly, invisibly, but permanently.